The universe stretched out in every direction, a boundless void of stars and planets, each one holding its own secrets, its own stories. Space, vast, cold, and indifferent, held countless mysteries, but none were as captivating or as dangerous as the Blood Serpent. The ship was more than just a vessel. It was a living monument to a past marred by conflict and bloodshed. Built by the once feared alien race, the Drakkar, the Blood Serpent had been the tip of their spear, a warship capable of annihilating entire civilizations. It was an unholy marriage of advanced technology and alien biology, its inner workings, a labyrinth of organic and mechanical systems that pulsed with a life of their own. Now it was commanded by a human, a woman who had never intended to find herself in the captain's seat of this beast, let alone lead it. Captain Lila Cade had never been meant for command. She had risen through the ranks of humanity's military, by sheer determination and skill, but never with any grand ambition to lead. As a former fighter pilot, her talents had been in the cockpit, not in the boardrooms or war councils where strategies were forged. Her rise had been meteoric, too fast for some to stomach, too improbable for others to believe, but there she was, standing on the bridge of the Blood Serpent, her hands gripping the console, feeling the hum of the ship's living systems under her fingertips. This was her reality now. This was her burden. When the call came for her to take command, it hadn't been the promise of power that had drawn her in. It had been the need. The universe was on the brink of war. Humanity had made a fragile peace with the Drakkar, but that peace was always teetering, and Cade was the one thrust into the center of it. She wasn't just leading a ship, she was holding the fragile thread of peace in her hands, trying to keep it from snapping. Her crew was a motley mix, humans who had survived the war and Drakkar soldiers who had been forced into this uneasy alliance. The alien crew members were silent, their strange, angular faces betraying nothing. They had little love for humanity, and even less trust in her leadership. Captain Cade had been given the Blood Serpent not as a reward but as a challenge, a test. She was human, and she was not meant to command this ship, let alone command it well. The warship was beautiful, in a terrifying, almost hypnotic way. Its curves were smooth, alien and sleek, but there was a predatory quality to its design, as if it had been made for only one purpose: to hunt. Its walls shifted and changed with the ship's needs, its systems alive in a way that was deeply unsettling. The thought of the technology inside her was enough to make Cade's skin crawl, but she didn't have the luxury of fear. She had to command it. She had to master it, or everything would fall apart. The moment Cade stepped onto the bridge of the Blood Serpent, she was greeted by the silent gaze of the alien officers stationed there. She wasn't sure if they respected her, feared her, or simply tolerated her presence. The Drakkar were an ancient species, their culture steeped in the brutal logic of war. Their ships were their homes, and the Blood Serpent was no exception. The ship's sentient systems, once attuned only to the Drakkar, now had to adapt to the presence of humans, an experiment that many saw as destined to fail. Her first task was simple, in theory: ensure the ship was prepared for its next mission. But Cade knew that nothing was simple on the Blood Serpent. The ship responded to her presence in strange ways. Its walls shuddered under her touch, the artificial intelligence that governed it reacting to her orders with an unpredictability that had begun to unsettle even her most loyal officers. Commander Rickon, the lead Drakkar officer assigned to the ship, stood silently in the corner of the bridge. He was tall, his form lithe and angular, his skin a dull shade of gray that reflected the dim lights of the command center. His eyes were narrow slits, glowing faintly with the faint green of Drakkar energy. To Rickon, humans were little more than an inconvenience, a species whose survival had been more of a fluke than a triumph. He had fought alongside them, against them, and had never found reason to respect them. Now, as Cade's second in command, he was forced to serve her, though every action, every order she gave, was met with a silent, almost imperceptible sneer. Cade had heard whispers of the Drakkar's disdain for human leadership. She had felt their judgment every day since taking command, It was a burden she carried in the quiet moments between orders, when she would walk through the darkened halls of the ship, wondering how long it would take before her crew turned on her. But she couldn't afford to think about that. The war was far from over, and the threat of rebellion, both internal and external, loomed over her like a storm cloud. The galaxy was on the edge of chaos, creatures that had once created it. But speed alone wouldn't be enough against the rogue faction. She would need strategy, intelligence, and, above all, decisive action. As the blood serpent drew closer to the enemy's position, the tension in the air became palpable. Cade's mind raced, calculating possibilities, strategies, and outcomes. She had no illusions about the magnitude of what was at stake. If she failed, it wouldn't just be the lives of her crew at risk. The future of humanity's fragile existence in the galaxy could be doomed. The thought haunted her, but she couldn't afford to let it paralyze her. She had to act. Without warning, the ship jolted as it entered the rogue faction's territory, an area of space that had long been abandoned by the Galactic Coalition. The sensors flared to life, sending waves of data flooding across the bridge. Cade's hand hovered over the console, waiting for the inevitable. And then, it came. A signal. A jolt in the fabric of space itself, as though the stars themselves had been shattered. A massive ship, unlike anything Cade had ever seen, materialized before them. It was a colossal, dark construct, its surface shimmering with an eerie, metallic glow. The rebel faction had arrived, and they had come prepared. "Captain, they've got us outgunned," Rickon said, his tone as cold as ever. But Cade could hear the undercurrent of something else, perhaps a hint of concern. The rogue faction's ship was enormous, far larger than the blood serpent, and its weapon systems pulsed with destructive power. They hadn't just come to fight, they had come to obliterate. Cade's fingers hovered over the ship's controls. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just a tactical decision, it was personal. The Drakkar had a history of brutal warfare, and humanity was often caught in the crossfire. But Cade had something the Drakkar lacked: human ingenuity. It wasn't about brute strength, it was about thinking differently, seeing beyond the immediate threat. She wasn't about to let her people become pawns in a war they didn't choose. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Cade barked, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're going to take them by surprise." Rickon didn't question her. He had fought beside humans long enough to understand that they often relied on unexpected tactics, the kind of tactics that made no sense until they worked. As the blood Serpent's engines roared to life, Cade's mind worked furiously to analyze the enemy ship's weaknesses. It wasn't enough just to outrun them, they had to outsmart them. The enemy ship loomed ever closer, its weapon systems charging. The air was thick with the weight of inevitable conflict, and every crew member on the bridge knew that the next moments would decide their fate. Then, without warning, the entire ship shuddered as the first salvo of enemy fire erupted toward them. Cade's heart skipped a beat, but her hands moved instinctively, navigating the blood serpent with the kind of precision only a fighter pilot could master. The ship veered, evading the first round of blasts, and then countered, returning fire, with a deadly precision that sent shockwaves through the enemy's vessel. But the fight was only beginning. As the ship's systems came to life, Cade knew she was no longer just fighting for victory. She was fighting to prove something. To prove that humanity could rise above its enemies no matter the odds. To prove that a human captain, her, could command the blood serpent and bring it through this conflict alive. The battle raged on, the blood serpent and the rogue faction clashing in a deadly dance of fire and fury. The stakes were higher than ever. But for Cade it was clear. This was more than just a mission. This was her test, the moment that would define her legacy. And the universe? The universe was watching. The tension aboard the blood serpent was unbearable. The quiet punctuated only by the hum of the ship's systems and the low murmur of the crew's hurried movements. The battle had escalated into something more than they could have imagined. The rogue faction's ship was powerful, its weaponry devastating, but Cade had led them into a fight they couldn't back down from. She gripped the command console with both hands, her knuckles white. The initial skirmish had been a terrifying reminder of the stakes at hand. Humanity was outmatched, surrounded by enemies on all sides, and every moment in the fight had brought them closer to the edge. The Blood Serpent wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had fought for, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that saw them as little more than ants underfoot. "We've got incoming fire from their flank," shouted Lieutenant Hale, the youngest officer on the bridge, his voice tight with panic. Cade didn't flinch. "Evasive maneuvers. Recon. What's their weak point?" The Drakkar commander moved to the console beside her, his alien eyes glowing faintly as he studied the data. Cade had come to trust him more than she'd ever expected. Despite his scorn for humanity, despite his deep, lingering hatred for the species, Recon had proven himself invaluable. His mind was as sharp as the claws of his people, and his tactical insights had kept them alive thus far. "Two primary weapons on their port side," Recon said, his voice steady as always, though there was a flicker of uncertainty. "Their shields are reinforced, but the lower hull is less protected. If we can break their shields on the left side, we can target their propulsion." The ship shuddered again as the enemy fired another barrage of shots, rattling the hull. Cade's fingers flew across the console as she barked orders to her crew. "Target their port side," she commanded, her voice cold but resolute. "Lock on the weak points and prepare for full firepower." There was no hesitation in the crew. Humanity, despite its often stated lack of experience in space warfare compared to the ancient Drakkar, had a weapon the Drakkar didn't: ingenuity. They had learned quickly, adapting their tactics to the needs of the battle. They were survivors, and they had the tenacity to fight back, even when the odds were stacked against them. As the Blood Serpent turned sharply, its weapons systems activated, unleashing a barrage of energy fire toward the rogue faction's port side. The blast struck true, shaking the enemy ship with a violent explosion. Cade felt a surge of relief, but knew it was short-lived. The rebel ship's weapons had been mostly intact, and their return fire was relentless. "Shields are holding," Lieutenant Hale shouted, his voice tinged with disbelief. Recon remained eerily silent. The Drakkar had a deep-seated understanding of battle. There was no room for false hope. Cade could see the wheels turning in his mind, analyzing the battle from every angle. "We need to act quickly," Cade said, her eyes never leaving the tactical screen. "We're not going to survive another hit like that." Recon's expression shifted slightly as if something was clicking into place. "I've got a suggestion, Captain. We can use the Blood Serpent systems. The ship's organic systems can communicate directly with theirs. If we can hack into their control systems, we might be able to take control of their weapons." Cade's heart raced. It was risky. If they failed, they would be defenseless. But it was a shot, and it was one they had to take. "Do it," she ordered. The air on the bridge was thick with the anticipation of a gamble that could either save them or doom them to destruction. Rickon moved swiftly to the ship's main control interface, linking with the ship's organic systems. The Blood Serpent responded with a faint pulse, almost as though it understood the gravity of the situation. 5 seconds, Rickon muttered. "This will be unpredictable." The ship's organic interfaces began to hum, strange patterns of light swirling across the bridge's command center. Cade could feel the ship's systems adapting, reaching out with an almost sentient awareness. The connection between the Blood Serpent and the enemy ship deepened. Cade wasn't sure what was happening, but she trusted Rickon. His people knew the ship's inner workings better than any human could. Suddenly, the console in front of her flickered. A message flashed across the screen in alien symbols. Then, a strange, mechanical voice spoke. "Control systems accessed. Weapons are now under our command." Cade's breath caught in her throat. She knew they had done it. But the thought of using the ship's power in this way, controlling another vessel's weapons, bending it to their will, sent a chill down her spine. "Now!" Cade shouted. "Take out their propulsion." The ship responded almost instinctively, firing a devastating shot directly at the enemy's propulsion system. The rebel ship's massive engines sparked and sputtered, a violent explosion ripping through its rear, sending it into a wild, uncontrollable spin. The enemy fleet began to scatter, their attack faltering as they tried to regroup. But it was too late. The Blood Serpent had once again demonstrated its might, and Cade had guided them through the storm. But it wasn't over. Far from it. Enemy reinforcements on the way, Rickon said, his voice low. We've only bought ourselves time. Cade's chest tightened. Time was all they had. The rogue faction's forces were not the only threat they would face. This was just the beginning. Prepare for the next wave, Cade ordered, her voice sharp and unyielding. We hold the line here, or everything we've fought for will be lost. As the battle continued to rage around them, Cade felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her more heavily than ever before. The Blood Serpent was their weapon, but she was the one holding the reins. Every decision she made now would ripple out, affecting not just the lives of those aboard her ship, but the fragile peace that still hung in the balance. The stakes had never been higher, and the true test of what humanity was capable of was just beginning. The air on the Blood Serpent crackled with tension, the entire crew poised for the next move. They had shattered the enemy's propulsion, but Cade knew that victory was far from guaranteed. The rogue faction, in all its fanatical glory, wasn't going to surrender easily. It had already proven its resilience, and now it was coming at them with everything it had left. The tactical screens blinked with new data, a constant stream of enemy reinforcements flooding in from the void. They were already closing in. Too many ships, too many weapons. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Cade's thoughts raced as she stood at the center of the command bridge, her fingers poised over the console. The battle had reached a point where it was no longer about tactics or technology, it was about survival. Her crew was exhausted, and the Blood Serpent, though powerful, had already sustained significant damage. She had to make a choice. We can't keep fighting like this, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She felt the weight of the ship's living systems pulsing beneath her skin. It was as if the Blood Serpent itself was reaching out, sensing the desperation. Rickon's voice cut through her thoughts. Captain, there's an alternative. The Blood Serpent is more than just a weapon. It was designed for something greater. If we initiate the core sequence, the ship's systems can overwhelm the enemy's fleet. We can disable their entire force. But... His voice trailed off. Cade turned to face him, eyes narrowed. She had learned to trust him, but this was something different. The Drakkar had always treated their technology as sacred. There was a ritual to it, a philosophy that Cade had yet to fully grasp. If she was going to use the Blood Serpent's core in such a way, there would be no going back. What do you mean, something greater? She demanded, her voice steely. Rickon hesitated, the hesitation a rare crack in his otherwise calm demeanor. The ship's core can emit an energy pulse, one that can disable entire fleets, but it will take all of the Blood Serpent's energy reserves. If we activate it, there's no guarantee we'll have the power to escape, and it could harm the crew. The systems will adapt to your orders, but they might not let us walk away from it. The ship might not let you. Cade felt the gravity of the situation settle over her like a suffocating weight. She had always known the Blood Serpent was unpredictable, but to use it as a weapon in this way, could she truly do that? Could she risk everything, her crew's lives, the fate of her mission, for the chance at survival? The ship might not let me, she echoed, her voice low. Rickon didn't respond. Didn't need to. The truth was already there, hanging in the air between them. The Blood Serpent had a will of its own, something that had been woven into its very design. And now it would either work with her, or it would destroy them all. Cade's mind raced. Every moment she spent debating was one less moment she had to act. The enemy was closing in fast. She had to decide now. Do it, Cade said, her voice firm, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. Prepare the core. There was a tense silence as Rickon worked swiftly at the controls, his fingers moving across the console, with a precision that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The ship's organic systems responded, the walls of the command center vibrating with the hum of energy as the Blood Serpent prepared to unleash its devastating force. The ship's AI seemed to hesitate as if it were questioning the captain's orders, but Cade steeled herself against it. She had no time for hesitation. Not now. Captain. Lieutenant Hale's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. Enemy. Fleet is within range. They're targeting us. The Blood Serpent's shields flickered, barely holding together under the barrage of incoming fire. Cade clenched her fist. She wasn't going to lose her crew, not after everything they had fought for. Hold them off, Cade barked. Engage evasive protocols, but keep the core active. We can't afford to wait any longer. The ship's AI seemed to comply, adapting to her will. The ship shuddered violently as it dodged incoming fire, its weapons system coming alive with destructive force. But Cade knew it wasn't enough. They needed something more. Core is ready, Rickon said, his voice steady. On your command, Captain. Cade's eyes locked onto the tactical screen. The rogue fleet loomed large, their ships closing in for the kill. And yet, Cade saw something else. Something that no one had anticipated. In the chaos of battle, she had seen it. The strange, almost alien flicker in the enemy fleet's formation. A weak point, a gap. Her decision was instantaneous. Do it now, Cade ordered. The ship's core unleashed its devastating energy in a blinding pulse. The entire bridge seemed to shake as the power rippled outward, a wave of raw energy crashing through the enemy fleet. It was as if the stars themselves were breaking apart, the universe itself shuddering in the wake of the destruction. The rogue ships that had been closing in were suddenly crippled, their weapons silenced, their engines dead. But the Blood Serpent groaned in response, its systems flickering. Cade could feel the ship's energy reserves draining rapidly, could feel the life force of the vessel itself being spent in that single, cataclysmic moment. She looked down at the console, seeing the dimming lights, the warning signs flashing red. The Blood Serpent was dying, but it had done its job. The enemy fleet was no longer a threat. Status report, Cade shouted, her voice strained. Enemy! Ships disabled, Lieutenant Hale reported, his voice almost breathless with disbelief. We did it. But Captain, we're out of power. We're stranded. Rickon's eyes flickered to Cade, unreadable as ever. The ship will not let us go, not unless we give it the power to do so, but we've used too much of it. The Blood Serpent will not recover from this. Cade's heart hammered in her chest. They had won, but they had also sealed their fate. The Blood Serpent had sacrificed itself for them, and now they were stranded, a ship on the verge of collapse floating in the void. Cade knew what that meant. They had no escape, no way out. But as the enemy ships lay crippled, their threat neutralized, Cade felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. She had won. But at what cost? The future of humanity was safe, for now. But the Blood Serpent was dying, and so too was the fragile peace she had fought so hard to protect. Her chest tightened as she looked around the bridge. The faces of her crew illuminated by the soft, flickering light of the ship's failing systems. They had made it through, but they hadn't just defeated the enemy. They had defeated themselves. And that, Cade knew, was the true cost of leadership. The universe would never be the same. The silence that followed the destruction of the rogue fleet was suffocating. The Blood Serpent, once a symbol of unimaginable power, now seemed fragile, its hum weak, its systems flickering like the dying embers of a long-extinguished fire. It had given everything, and now it was on the edge of collapse. Captain Cade stood, in the center of the bridge, her body numb, her mind still racing. They had won against all odds, they had triumphed over the enemy. But at what cost? The Blood Serpent had drained itself to fuel that one final devastating attack. Its energy reserves were depleted, and the crew was left with little more than the cold, empty expanse of space surrounding them. We did it, Lieutenant Hale said, his voice hushed, disbelief still hanging in the air. We actually did it. But Cade couldn't bring herself to respond. Her eyes were fixed on the ship's dimming tactical screens. The Blood Serpent had neutralized the threat, but they had no way of knowing if it would survive much longer. The systems were failing. The core, the very heart of the ship, was slowly dying, and the Blood Serpent had no more power to continue. Recon, ever stoic, stood beside her, his alien eyes scanning the bridge. His features remained impassive, though there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. Perhaps, Cade thought, he too had realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished and lost. The ship. She will not recover, Recon said, his voice low, almost reverent. It has given all it has, Captain. Its systems will not regenerate. We will not escape this place without help. Cade felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. The Blood Serpent was more than just a ship. It had been their lifeline. The weapon that had brought them through impossible odds, now drained of its vitality. She had fought to the bitter end, but now she faced an even more insurmountable challenge. Survival. We'll find a way out, Cade said, her voice steely, even though a part of her knew the truth. The Blood Serpent wasn't going to make it much longer. The universe had no mercy on those who were abandoned in the void, but as if in response to her unspoken despair, the ship's AI flickered one last time, its systems struggling to stay alive. A soft, almost mournful hum resonated through the bridge as the core powered down completely. "We're dead in the water," Cade muttered. There was no denying it now. They were stranded in deep space, with no power to escape, no way to contact the outside world. The Blood Serpent had done its job, but its mission was now over, and the crew was left to face the consequences of their actions. "Captain," Hale said, his voice breaking the silence. "What do we do now?" Cade's gaze shifted to the crew, her crew. They were all that was left now. The mission had been a success, but they had sacrificed everything to achieve it. Some would say it was worth it, that their victory had been enough to ensure humanity's survival. But Cade wasn't so sure. She knew better than anyone that victory didn't come without its own cost. She inhaled deeply, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, of plans, of impossible calculations, and yet, as her eyes swept over the crew, she felt an unexpected sense of clarity. They had made it this far because of their determination, their willingness to adapt, to push through when the odds were insurmountable. It was that same fire that would keep them alive now. "We find a way," Cade said, her voice firm, unwavering. "We survive. We wait for a rescue, or we do what we've always done. We make our own way out." There was no arrogance in her voice, no bravado. It was the quiet certainty of a leader who had faced impossible odds and come out on top. She had led them into this mess, and now she would lead them out of it. As she spoke, the tactical screen flickered one more time. A single signal, faint, distant, pulsed across the interface. A distress beacon sent by a nearby human fleet. Cade's heart skipped a beat as the realization set in. They weren't alone. Help was coming, but it wasn't just the rescue that caught her attention. The signal wasn't just a distress call. It was a warning. The message, a garbled transmission, was unmistakable. "The war isn't over." Cade's heart sank. The victory had been short-lived. The universe was far from ready for humanity to step into its full power. The tensions, the betrayals, the cosmic struggles were far from finished. The galaxy would not forgive what had been done, and the path ahead would be more treacherous than anything they had ever faced. Still, there was hope. For the first time since the battle had begun, Cade allowed herself a moment of quiet. She was alive. Her crew was alive. The Blood Serpent might be dying, but the spirit that had driven them all, the indomitable will to survive, was very much alive. As the signal from the human fleet grew stronger, Cade made a decision. They would survive. They would live to fight another day. The universe might not be ready for humanity, but humanity had proven it was more than ready for the universe. "Prepare for the rescue," Cade said, her voice unwavering. "We're not done yet." The Blood Serpent might have been the weapon that secured their survival, but it was humanity's resolve that would ensure its legacy. As the crew readied themselves for the uncertain future, Cade couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There were more battles to fight, more decisions to make. The cost of victory had been high, but the true measure of what humanity was capable of had only just begun to unfold. The universe had not seen anything yet. The blood serpent lay dormant in the cold expanse of space, its once vibrant core now silent, a hulking relic of an age-old battle. Its hull, scarred and battered, floated like a fallen titan, its once mighty pulse no longer reverberating through the vacuum. Yet the heart of the ship, the soul of it, was not gone. Not completely. Captain Lila Cade stood before the window of the bridge, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. Outside, the stars were as cold and indifferent as ever, their eternal light casting an unfeeling glow on the ruins of the ship. But within her something had changed. There was a quiet fire, an ember that had not died with the ship's final battle. The victory, though hard won, was only the beginning. It had to be. Her eyes moved toward the console where the faintest signal blinked in and out of existence, the distant distress call she had received earlier. It was still weak, but it was growing stronger. A human fleet, coming for them to pull them out of the cold emptiness. But Cade knew that the war was far from over. That message, the warning embedded in the transmission, had been clear. The battle for humanity's future wasn't one that would be fought with ships or weapons. It would be fought with survival, with alliances, and with the very heart of humanity itself. "Captain, the fleet is still on course," Rickon's voice broke the silence, as cold and unreadable as always. He stood beside her, his tall, angular figure a stark contrast against the backdrop of the stars. The Drakkar commander had said little since the battle, his eyes often scanning the dark void outside, as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the blackness. Cade turned to him, her face drawn and weary but resolute. "They're coming, but that won't be enough." Her voice was quiet, but there was strength in it, strength forged in the fires of battle. "We've won a battle, Rickon, but the war isn't over. Not by a long shot." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "The blood serpent, it is gone. But the lessons we've learned here will echo across the stars. The universe is shifting, Captain, and humanity, for all its faults, has a place in it." Cade's mind raced as she recalled the message she had received. The cryptic warning had unsettled her in a way she hadn't expected. The war isn't over. A faction had been crushed, but the forces that had rallied behind it were only part of a larger, more intricate web of power and conflict that spanned the galaxy. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, but now, in the aftermath of their victory, they were being thrust into a universe that was as hostile as it was vast. Her thoughts were interrupted as the faint hum of the approaching fleet grew louder. The rescue was imminent. But the crew of the Blood Serpent had learned one inescapable truth. Even with the fleet's arrival, they would have to navigate the moral and political maelstrom of a galaxy that was far from ready to accept them. They would need allies. They would need strength. But most of all, they would need to remain adaptable. Humanity had shown that it could be resilient, but the question now was, could they be wise enough to survive? As the first ships of the human fleet appeared on the horizon, a sense of quiet relief washed over the crew. They had made it, barely. The blood serpent might have been their weapon, but it was their survival, their ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast that would ultimately define them. Yet Cade knew this was merely the beginning. The alliance between humanity and the Drakkar was fragile, built on the shared need to survive, but the undercurrents of distrust and old wounds would take time to heal. Even as the human fleet closed in, the shadow of war loomed ever closer. There would be no turning back from the choices they had made. The universe had tasted humanity's resilience, and it would not forget. With a final glance at the stars outside the window, Cade turned toward her crew. There were no words to say. There didn't need to be. The crew had survived, but there was a deeper question to be answered, one that would shape the future of humanity in the galaxy. "What now?" Hale asked, his voice quieter than usual. Cade took a breath, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "Now," she said, "we rebuild. We prepare. And we make sure the galaxy knows exactly what humanity is capable of." As the blood serpent slowly drifted toward the awaiting fleet, its systems barely keeping it intact, the crew knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would either forge humanity's place in the galaxy or shatter it. And just as the human fleet arrived, a new, ominous signal pulsed in the farthest reaches of space, a dark, mysterious beacon that had been activated, drawing the attention of the crew. They weren't the only ones watching, and they certainly weren't the only ones preparing for the next chapter in the cosmic drama that was unfolding. As Cade looked out once more at the stars, she knew the universe was not ready for humanity, but humanity was more than ready for it. Had rallied behind it were only part of a larger, more intricate web of power and conflict that spanned the galaxy. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, but now, in the aftermath of their victory, they were being thrust into a universe that was as hostile as it was vast. Her thoughts were interrupted as the faint hum of the approaching fleet grew louder. The rescue was imminent, but the crew of the Blood Serpent had learned one inescapable truth. Even with the fleet's arrival, they would have to navigate the moral and political maelstrom of a galaxy that was far from ready to accept them. They would need allies. They would need strength. But most of all, they would need to remain adaptable. Humanity had shown that it could be resilient, but the question now was, could they be wise enough to survive? As the first ships of the human fleet appeared on the horizon, a sense of quiet relief washed over the crew. They had made it. Barely. The Blood Serpent might have been their weapon, but it was their survival, their ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast that would ultimately define them. Yet Cade knew this was merely the beginning. The alliance between humanity and the Drakkar was fragile, built on the shared need to survive. But the undercurrents of distrust and old wounds would take time to heal. Even as the human fleet closed in, the shadow of war loomed ever closer. There would be no turning back from the choices they had made. The universe had tasted humanity's resilience, and it would not forget. With a final glance at the stars outside the window, Cade turned toward her crew. There were no words to say. There didn't need to be. The crew had survived, but there was a deeper question to be answered, one that would shape the future of humanity in the galaxy. What now? Hale asked, his voice quieter than usual. Cade took a breath, letting the gravity of the moment settle. Now, she said, we rebuild, we prepare, and we make sure the galaxy knows exactly what humanity is capable of. As the Blood Serpent slowly drifted toward the awaiting fleet, its systems barely keeping it intact, the crew knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would either forge humanity's place in the galaxy or shatter it. And just as the human fleet arrived, a new ominous signal pulsed in the farthest reaches of space, a dark, mysterious beacon that had been activated, drawing the attention of the crew. They weren't the only ones watching. And they certainly weren't the only ones preparing for the next chapter in the cosmic drama that was unfolding. As Cade looked out once more at the stars, she knew the universe was not ready for humanity, but humanity was more than ready for it.